signs and portents in the sky, or were there? Suddenly, people from coast to coast began seeing something up there. Something called flying saucers. We'd broken the sound barrier and hit the moon with radar. This was the age of missiles and rockets. We were getting used to wonders. So why not visitors from outer space? Hundreds of people told Air Force investigators they'd seen the saucers with their own eyes. Bright, shiny things that wished through the air at incredible speeds. Even airline pilots who seldom indulge in fantasy reported sighting them. And Air Force flyers told of chasing them, or something, all over the sky. The Air Force called them unidentified flying objects, but people went right on calling them saucers and seeing them. There was something in the air.
We've seen them.
You've seen them?
Yeah.
Around here?
We've seen from 3 to 7 in the sky at night.
A smaller object, almost identical in size, came up from behind it, attached itself to the bottom of it.
It wasn't a helicopter because when it did take off or fly away, it flew at a rapid rate of speed.
I told the Major that that tower beacon is paralleling us, or coming with us.
It was just getting larger and larger. It looked like a landing light on a commercial aircraft.
We just kept looking and couldn't figure out the problem why. And she was looking over there too. She said, well, it's one of those UFOs. Tell what you're talking about.
About the time that I seen it, it seemed to just stop, just land. And all of a sudden, one end of it just opened up.
It scared me because I didn't know what it was. I knew it was an airplane or nothing like that because it sat down too low and it came too low towards the house.
At one point, it was right over our car, following us right up the road here until we made the turn. And it made the turn and crossed right over in front of us.
And they had arms, and they didn't have hands as we have. They had more or less like pinchers or claws or something like that.
This object was there. There isn't any question in my mind about it.
Some say they are space beings from another world.
They had arms, something like human arms, human beings' arms, but their hands were well, like this.
Some say they are a mass psychological delusion of the 20th century.
I saw a flying object that was not manufactured, in my opinion, on this earth. That was metallic, and it was an aircraft.
Some say they're advanced space vehicles being built by the Americans or the Russians or somebody here on Earth.
It was definitely a flying craft.
And I say maybe they are the angels of God.
Right about this position here in the plexiglass, I observed the UFO.
But then when we saw this red dome on top, we knew, and no sound at all from it. We knew that it had to be, a UFO.
In front of this tree, you're not...
Well, it came over and then came down a little bit lower than it.
Mm-hmm.
And then went back up. And it right in a perfect V shape.
What we do know from refining this data is that something is being seen in our atmosphere, that this something is craft-like in nature, it's solid.
Here's something going on in the sky. People report it constantly, over and over and over again for 30 years. It's part of our environment. Why isn't it something that's known?
Everything got quiet before the incident that was taking place. There was no sound involved. There was no worry. Didn't hear a pin drop. It definitely was there.
The evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled vehicles from off the Earth. In other words, some UFOs are somebody else's spacecraft.
We've had, in this country alone, several tens of thousands of UFO reports. Yet there has not been a single crashed extraterrestrial spaceship. There hasn't been a single piece fall off of one.
You see, the idea of us being visited should be the hypothesis of last resort. Only when every other possibility is eliminated do we go to such exotic possibilities.
It was in the late 1940s when people first began reporting unidentified flying objects, or flying saucers as they were then called. For a while it was a sensation, and enough attention was centered on the subject to cause the United States Air Force to begin a study of the phenomenon. For several years that quieted the public clamor, and then 5 years ago the Air Force closed its investigation with the conclusion that even though a small percentage of the sightings could not be explained, Earth was not being visited from outer space. That, however, did not put an end to the UFO sightings. In fact, during the last 2 years, they've been increasing in number. Tonight, we will hear from people who claim to have seen unidentified flying objects. We will also hear from people who believe that some UFOs are spaceships from somewhere else, and from other people who do not believe that at all. We're going to report how that question stands at the moment, and let you decide. Do you believe?
These people are tracking flares for practice. So if they ever see a UFO, they will be able to report accurately its speed and direction. It's an exercise held every summer in southern Illinois by the Mutual UFO Network.
Still 280 degrees.
We attack this entirely from a scientific viewpoint because the people in the Mutual UFO Network are very serious. And they're from all walks of life, from all occupations, all ages, but they have one common interest, and that is resolving the UFO phenomenon. Do UFOs exist? How are they powered? What's their system of propulsion? Where do they originate? Where are they from? And what can we learn from these little fellows that drive them?
On the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona, is the headquarters of the oldest of the UFO study groups, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. It was founded in 1952 by Jim and Coral Lorenzen.
We always expected, I think, in the early days that the mystery would be solved the next day. But after a few years went by, we began to change our attitude. So we began to work toward the goal of collecting data that can be used as a base for scientific study.
Here we have objects which are obviously beyond our technology, flying around the skies, occasionally landing, things or entities getting out of them, taking soil samples and vegetable samples, sometimes rabbits or something, whatever they get their hands on. We ought to know who they are, where they're from, and why they're here.
This UFO that you observed, what time did you see it and on what day? John Acuff is president of the largest of the UFO organizations, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which has its headquarters in a Maryland suburb of Washington. We know something's up there. The evidence is just overwhelming that something is being seen and we cannot identify it. However, what that something is still in doubt, and that's what the research effort is all about at this point in time. Much of what we hear about unidentified flying objects comes through the three major UFO study groups. ICAP in Maryland, APRO in Arizona, and MUFON in Quincy, Illinois. All three of the UFO groups are chartered as nonprofit educational organizations. Among them, the three groups have about 8,000 dues-paying members scattered around the 50 states and in about 30 foreign countries. The dues pay the cost of running an office and publishing a monthly newsletter. Each group's newsletter is filled mostly with reports of recent sightings, and these reports are one of the keys to understanding the UFO phenomenon. The UFO organizations exist because the sightings exist.
And just as we started down the woods, well, it went up through the trees. Looked like a big cigar shape.
No one knows how many sightings there are. No one knows even how many are reported. Each UFO organization says they receive one or two a day, either directly or after the sightings have been reported to police departments, newspapers, or radio and television stations. Although we don't know how many sightings there are each day, we do know there is a steady stream of reports of strange things seen in the sky. When UFOs began making headlines in the late 40s, the Air Force began an investigation that continued for 22 years. During most of that time, the Air Force's chief civilian consultant on UFOs was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was then an astronomer at Ohio State University.
Doctor, out of all the 10,000 odd sightings that the Air Force has investigated, have you any evidence for extraterrestrial
spaceships or what have you?
None of the evidence that I've examined would indicate any proof at all that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
Dr. Hynek called himself a skeptic during those years. Now, he believes UFOs should have had a higher priority.
Had the Air Force really thought the subject was serious, then it would have been certainly under the head of at least a colonel and probably a general. But for years it was under the head of a captain, and sometimes even just a lieutenant to begin with.
Various Air Force bases had some local officer who was to investigate things, and that was not the most highly prized assignment on the Air Force base, to be the local UFO officer.
But they never actually denied the existence of UFOs, never once, of the phenomenon of UFOs. But they said, in effect, whatever it was did not endanger the national security of the United States. And that is their primary responsibility.
The government's UFO files are stored here at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. In 5.5 filing cabinets are notes, documents, and interviews on 12,618 UFO cases. 701 of them are still marked unknown. Since 1969, the investigation has been officially closed. Today, the investigation of UFO sightings is in the hands of the private UFO organizations. These people are members of the Mutual UFO Network, and they are all part-time volunteer investigators.
Anybody who recognizes a UFO right off the bat, you should be suspicious. Why was this person ready to see a UFO?
One of the investigators at this meeting is Ted Phillips, a highway inspector from Sedalia, Missouri, who pursues UFO cases in his spare time. Mr. Phillips, like almost everyone else here, has never seen a UFO himself. His interest comes through the reports of what others have seen.
I found the imprints here, like the tripod. It's set down here, and whatever it was, a creature, or object, or however, it got out and went this way. With the grass, it's tall now, as you can see, but it was brushed aside. And I guess the footprints were about 5 feet apart, I guess. The stride was real large. And it made a circular motion. Right in this vicinity here, with this tree limb, he had jerked and jerked till it snapped completely. It made a thrashing sound. This one shook my daughters because with the other activities going on, the light shining and the movement, the thrashing sound, well, she got somewhat hysterical almost, and I was trying to hold my cool, not to come unglued myself, and
the Richards case, the Columbia, Missouri case, is a very good one.
Shortly afterwards.
I have no idea what he saw, other than to say that he saw a UFO, because we can't identify it. There's no rational explanation for it.
And a second or two, here he comes right back again, as if it forgot something, you know, and landed at the same identical spot up there.
And you mentioned loading your gun.
Yes, and something at this time told me not to shoot or even not to go outside, just to stay still, lock your doors, and just wait it out. That's what I did.
Well, having your dogs exhibit that kind of fear, too,
yeah, that was another
good indication.
That's right. They disappeared. They quit barking, and what you might say, we were trapped. So we couldn't do anything.
The Richards case is a very, very interesting case, and it has to rank quite high.
Like other UFO investigators, Mr. Phillips has two problems. First, he must pursue UFO cases on his own time and at his own expense. Second, the physical evidence is never conclusive. What could be proof of a UFO landing could also be explained in other ways. In the end, Mr. Phillips must judge the UFO sighting by what the witness tells him about it.
You must take...
Another part-time UFO investigator is Dr. Alan Hynek, chairman of the astronomy department at Northwestern University.
Right over right here is where I took the shot.
All right, now then, show me exactly where...
Last summer, Dr. Hynek investigated a UFO sighting in Lincolnshire, Illinois. The witness was David Dorn, age 11.
The first photograph was taken, as I recall, above those treetops, just coming down like a bubble. Second photograph was coming down at a very steep angle, coming down right past that treetop. I think it's just a little bit lower than those trees over there.
All right, and then what?
And then it came up just like a V. And I got another shot of it coming up. And then it started coming down a little faster than before, which I took another
So it
picture.
came down the second time.
Yes. And hovered, which I took another picture. And then up through the clouds.
So just about 60 seconds, just about.
Right. I took a picture of it going up. That was my last shot.
If you were going to deliberately fake photographs like this, let me ask you, how would you go about it?
Well, the first thing that comes into mind is that I could probably take a garbage can lid and maybe pick it up in a wire from a treetop to another treetop and photograph it at different angles.
I see, and do you think that would be a likely thing to do?
No, but that's really about all I can
Let me
think
ask, did you do that?
No.
All right. Well, I had to get there. And now, tell me, where are the negatives?
Well, those were accidentally lost by my fault. I was so excited about the results of the pictures. They turned out so good that I just threw everything away, and they went out with the trash the other night.
You're just so interested in watching the pictures, seeing the
Yeah, I
prints,
got so excited about them, yes.
I'll bet you that's bothered you since.
Yes, it's
You've been kidding about that quite a bit?
quite a bit.
According to a recent Gallup poll survey, 51% of the people interviewed believe that unidentified flying objects are real and not just figments of the imagination. And my next guests are a little more than just believers because they actually came in contact with a UFO. Please welcome Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker.
These two men are probably the best-known UFO witnesses in history. Theirs was not an ordinary UFO sighting. Many people wanted to hear about it.
The people themselves don't want to, they just are not seeking publicity, just want to relay their story to proper governmental authority.
Sheriff's deputies went to the scene.
There's no way of us determining whether anything landed here.
What happens now?
We're fixing to take them to Keesler Air Force Base right now. We're checking them for radiation, and they're going to check them over there.
UFO investigators interviewed the men.
Both of the men were able to be hypnotized. The experience, however, has been so traumatic that I thought it best that we go slow with this investigation.
There's simply no question in my mind but that these men have had a very trying experience.
They came out to a point.
At first, the men refused to talk to reporters. Then they agreed to talk if they were not seen. Soon, they were facing the cameras and talking to anyone who would listen. But when two men come in and say they have been picked up by a spacecraft and examined, how do you go about investigating that?
Well, all we could do is go to the scene and interview these men and really stay with these men and observe them and question them. I mean, to the fullest extent. And at no time could we, their stories were the same. We interviewed them separately and before, and then we put them together. And we monitored their conversation. I believe the men saw something that scared them. Now, like I said already, I don't know what.
A few days after the UFO incident, Charlie Hickson went back to his job as a foreman at Walker & Son shipyard in Pascagoula. Calvin Parker also worked at the shipyard, but after the incident, he quit his job and moved back to his hometown, Laurel, Mississippi.
Just to start with, I thought I was just gone as far as mentally. So I got out and got married, got a job on this chicken farm. When I was working in the oil field, they wouldn't let me work out there and didn't pay so, because you know how a bunch of men is, they'll harass you and all, so I quit. Went to work on this chicken farm, just me and my wife, and I really enjoyed it down there now, and I've got myself back together in the past few months, and
No, I'm feeling a lot better now. I'm doing real good now.
Do you have any notion why you were picked?
No, not really. I guess I've asked myself that question 100 times. Why me?
It is, in my mind, a hoax that's been perpetrated on the American public. The story is so fantastic, it almost challenges one's credulity.
Well, the only honest thing I can say is that they both had one hell of a frightening experience. But whether it was a real nuts and bolts hardware, something absolutely tangible, I can't say, because when I was there, I looked around to see if there are any physical effects, as we have had in other cases, where the ground has been disturbed or tree branches broken. I could find no evidence, no physical evidence in this particular case. And yet, to them, I feel quite sure they weren't hoaxing or weren't lying.
Things have been written, and many different stories have been told about what happened October 11th, 1973, on the banks of the Pascagoula River here in Pascagoula, Mississippi. We had encountered something that had to be from another world. Our government said.
Mr. Hickson's record is a straightforward account of the story he has told so often during the last year.
200 million people. Get more involved with it. They shouldn't. We need to get to care what was felt.
Mr. Hickson is also writing a book and has taken a leave of absence from his job to work on it.
You know, something will happen to all of us some of these days, and if something did happen to me, then there will be a record of what did happen to Calvin and me.
I will announce Rennie Bradley, TV reporter on the scene, reports on UFOs. Okay, Rennie, and then you, like I said, we want the record sold, and then you introduce Mr. Hickson. And then after that, I'm going to take this young lady here, I'm going to hypnotize her, she's going to go back to her mommy's tummy, and we're going to go into her super consciousness, which is back into probably another world or somewhere. And then we're going to ask her questions all about UFOs. Charlie, I want you to sit next to her because you're going to feel some of your vibrations.
Sunday, I'm going to sit down with him, and I'm going to get just as close as I can of what the craft looked like.
Hey, Charlie.
I probably look worse than that.
Did you see the thing take off and go away and disappear?
I saw it leave. I can't say that how far out I've seen it, but it seemed to just almost instantly it was gone.
Yeah, and this is the examining thing that
yes.
floated in front of you.
Right.
How do you feel about all this by now? Why do you think you were singled out?
Well, I don't know. I can't figure that out. I have no idea. I keep saying, why me, what does it mean? Dear Mr. Hickson, we saw you on the Dick Cavett show, and we were fascinated by your experience. We believe in the things you have been said, and do not think you are involved in a hoax of any kind. We do believe that we are not the only beings in the universe, and that people should be aware of that fact. And it's signed sincerely, Sarah Roberts and Jim Nelson.
I didn't believe him at first, just like all other people. I really didn't believe it. But now I definitely believe every word he has spoken because I have been through with what he has gone through with, living with him.
It's costing me a lot of time. It's actually cost me money. But I don't know. I just feel obligated now to let the entire world, if necessary, know that these things did happen to us, that it is true.
He's a truthful man.
I voted for number 1. He looks like the kind of a gentleman that this conceivably did happen to. Like somebody said, he looks very sobered by the experience.
We have 2 votes for number 1, and we have 1 vote for number 2 and 1 vote for number 3. So, will the real Charles Hickson please stand up?
This is an unidentified flying object, an UFO, photographed by an Australian television film crew shot out of an airplane window as they flew over New Zealand earlier this week. The pilot of the plane said he spotted it at about 20 miles, and then it began to turn with him as he changed course at 10 miles, and then it circled above and below the plane, making definite movements until it disappeared. Well, closer home, reports of UFO sightings have been sweeping Italy since shortly before Christmas. From Sicily in the south to Milan in the north, photographers have been snapping away at the skies to come up with pictures like these, objects that seem at least to defy normal explanation. Well, it's raised a lot more speculation about just what is going on out there, and among others who have been following this very carefully this morning is a man who has his home in Evanston, Illinois. He is Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Professor Emeritus of Astronomy at Northwestern University. He has been talking with UFO researchers around the world because that's part of his job. He's the director of the UFO Center in Evanston, Illinois. Can you tell us what they're saying, the experts in New Zealand, first of all, about what was spotted down there?
Well, we need much more data on that. It's a grand mix-up at the moment. We don't know at the moment whether some of the shots were of Venus or whether they are something real. And if we are to believe what the reports are, the preliminary reports, then it is not Venus. It's because they say the thing went under the plane and around the plane and so forth. But this all calls for some very real research, and no real research has been done. And by that I mean funded research, because here we have a subject that has been capturing the interest of millions of people, and yet nothing really is being done about it.
Before we get to the research angle, what about the situation in Italy?
Oh, that is really wild. I was talking to Florence just yesterday, and last Saturday in Pizzaro, a huge object was reported to have landed right smack in the middle of an army barracks, and it hovered about 2 meters above the ground, and they tell me it cooked the ground underneath it now. And then it's been brought up at in the Italian Congress. Yeah. They're calling for an investigation. The Ministry of Defense is puzzled. They're embarrassed, as a matter of fact, as to what this is all about.
Isn't it possible that these are just gaseous formations, which has been one of the explanations often offered for UFOs?
Yeah, I'm afraid it goes back to the day when I called the Michigan thing swamp gas way back then.
Right.
But that is pretty much out.
What about these people who say that they've been abducted by little green men or held hostage for a time, have a close encounter of whatever kind?
That's exactly what they say. Yeah. I worked with them quite a bit. They are not lying. They believe it has happened. And as one of the founders of modern sociology said, if people believe something is real, then the effects are real.
Well, what do we do about these most recent sightings and all of the sightings? We have an international body formed with cooperation on the parts of lots of governments funding a research program of some kind.
That's what should be done. The subject came up in the United Nations recently. We have reports from 133 different countries. And the same pattern exists around the world. It's not just localized in one particular country, you see.
UFOs again, flying objects, reported spasmodically for many years now, and most people have remained skeptical. Now, the federal government says there have been more reports of sightings in recent years, and some around military bases, they say. And some witnesses reported the UFOs were shaped like hamburgers, even Big Macs. Here's Ford Rowland at the Pentagon.
The Air Force has insisted since 1969 that sightings of unidentified flying objects are explainable. That what looks like a flying saucer is really a weather balloon or a meteorite, like this one appears to be in this old film. But some of the sightings have never been explained. Newly released government documents show that there was a sudden string of sightings of UFOs in late 1975. The objects were seen around nuclear storage facilities, missile silos, and 3 Air Force bases in this country. Guards reported seeing strange lights in the sky. The objects were tracked on military radar screens. Some were thought to be helicopters because they hovered right over missile silos, and when chased by military planes, the objects sped away at very high speeds, too fast to be helicopters. In 1976, a glowing object in Iran eluded an F-4 Phantom jet after the jet's electronic weapons suddenly became inoperative. The Central Intelligence Agency collected reports of sightings for years from all over the world. The CIA concluded that many were phony, most were explainable, and there was no threat to national security. Neither the Air Force nor the CIA is investigating UFOs now, and officials do not like to talk about the subject. Questioned about the 1975 sightings, a Pentagon press officer said that if a base commander wants an investigation, he should phone his local sheriff.
And in the skies over the West Coast this morning, an unidentified speeding light and apparently a sonic boom. Many saw it, but there's been no official explanation. Well, maybe they should ask the Pentagon in, about 47 years. NBC's Jim Miklashevsky tonight on the Air Force fessing up almost a half-century after another UFO.
Stories about UFOs and aliens swooping down from outer space have long captured our imagination, especially the Roswell incident. 47 years ago, something crashed into the desert outside Roswell, New Mexico, and for 47 years, the Pentagon lied about it. Eyewitnesses had reported debris from a flying disc scattered over 2/3 of a mile. Some stories included the bodies of 4-foot-tall aliens, crew members killed in the extraterrestrial crash. The Pentagon denied it was a UFO and claimed the debris came from a military weather balloon. But the Air Force now says it wasn't a weather balloon after all, but a top-secret balloon to spy on the Soviets. That would appear to explain all the Pentagon's secrecy, right? Wrong.
Oh my God. This thing was big.
As depicted in a recent movie, several witnesses claim the military forced them to change their stories and hide the evidence. Walter Haut was an airman in Roswell at the time, and now runs a UFO museum.
I think that their comments are simply another cover-up.
Some UFO buffs believe the military covered it up to protect against public panic because they couldn't explain it.
Perhaps alien and non-human, something not made by any power on this earth.
The government contends most UFO sightings can be explained, but out of the thousands reported over the years, 1 out of 10 remains a mystery. As for Roswell, the case is not closed. The General Accounting Office will release its own report soon.
The decision rests with you.
Jim Miklashevsky, NBC News, Washington.